All right, so in today's video, we're gonna take a look at the Autel EVO 2 and how it does at nighttime flying. Stick around. What's good, guys? Welcome back. Ken here, you're watching Original Dobo. And in today's video, we're taking a look at how well the EVO 2 8K performs at night. I've received a lot of questions on this and people are genuinely concerned whether or not this is at all usable with limited lighting. The Mavic 2 Pro, we already know, does phenomenal when the lighting is limited. And before we get too far into any of these clips, I just want to put out a brief disclaimer that yes, you are allowed to fly your drone at night. It's not illegal. You have to fly as a hobbyist, or if you're a 107 pilot, have a daylight waiver. In my case, I'm pretty lucky because Zach has a daylight waiver and I can easily claim flying as a hobbyist, which is what we did for this entire video. We just flew as hobbyists for the whole thing. And we put a Lume Cube on top of here on both of these so we can have extra visibility. And at the bottom of both of these drones have similar lighting situations where you can flip them on either manually or automatically. In this case, I opted to turn them on manually so that way while the drone was in the air over us, we can still maintain sight. We also didn't go over any roadways where there would be traffic, and we made sure that the drone was just roughly about 2,000 feet away from us at all times so we can maintain line of sight. I will say that the roads were pretty dead. There was zero traffic, nor did any officers or any security walk up to us at any one point. We were pretty discreet and got to location without incident and didn't have any issues. So I started out by the SunTrust building, taking the EVO 2 up, and this was sort of my open-in shot, and I just wanted to sort of see what it can do. I've flown this spot several times before with the Mavic 2 Pro, so I already knew what the Mavic 2 Pro could do, and I was just curious as to what the EVO could do. Now, I put the drone in 6K, 24 frames per second. The ISO was set to 1600. By the way, in any frame rate over 4K, or I should say in any resolution over 4K, your ISO will only allow you a maximum of 1600. I didn't know that at the time, but I went ahead and set the shutter at about 40. I know that was a little bit less than 50 where it should be as double, but it worked out pretty well. And I think that the shot looks decent. I left the white balance in automatic and it looked pretty good. The colors around the reds were a little washed out and the blues were a little blown out, but I think overall for the size sensor that it is, it looked pretty decent. Now this sensor has a 1.8 aperture, which allows much more light in, and it definitely shows. There is some noise in this shot, but it wasn't too terrible. Now you may ask yourself, why weren't you using log profiles on these clips? And the short answer to that is log introduces more noise because it raises the shadows, and I didn't want to battle with shadows being raised and not having to really worry about highlights being clipped. So I don't think there's any benefit to using log at night. That's just my opinion. You may vary on that. I took the same route with the Mavic 2 Pro and I shot in 4K, 24 frames per second as well. And I think the image definitely looks a lot cleaner, which is to be expected. I also feel that the reds and the blues were much more saturated and pleasing on the Mavic 2 Pro. Now, again, color is always going to be subjective between two cameras, but I definitely did like the color from the Mavic 2 Pro. Now, flipping over to the camera side of life and taking photos, I decided to try out Hyperlight on the EVO 2, which literally it's called Hyperlight in the settings on the EVO. If you've ever used a DJI Mavic 2, you'll also know DJI has something called Hyperlight as well. It's crazy they're using the same naming, but anyways, I fired off one shot top down and it came out absolutely phenomenal. I decided to replicate that same shot with the EVO, or I should say with the Mavic 2 Pro, and it would not actually allow me to get above the building. There is a small airport not too far from where we were flying, and it just wouldn't let me to go any higher than the building. So even though you're allowed to go, higher than the building, even though the building is 390 feet, I can go above that. Wouldn't let me do it, so I couldn't even do it. So no photo from the top with this. I think Mike from Accelerated Heights was able to get above the building with his Mavic 2 Pro. So if you want a comparison, check out his video that he just posted. He was able to get above the building. But the EVO 2, I tried to take a shot from the front of the SunTrust building and it looked very washed out and just blown out with Hyperlight. It wasn't all that impressive. but the same can be said about the Mavic 2 Pro's Hyperlight. It wasn't all that impressive, at least from that angle. Moving over to location number 2, which was the City Hall. This was a very contrasty area and also had a pretty good amount of ambient light to work with. And I shot in 4K, 24 frames per second. And I think that really does show here because it's a little bit cleaner of a shot. Granted, we do have much more light to work with, but I was much happier with the image off of the City Hall than I was at the SunTrust building. I decided to take off a couple of photos, and I still used Hyperlight because I was just enamored with how good the shots were looking right off the SD card and that you wouldn't have to do much editing with it. And they did, they looked really great. Now the top-down shots for this instance didn't look that good, and it wasn't quite as clean, and it could have been because the light was affecting the exposure levels, but for some reason it just didn't look as clean as what I was hoping for. Location number 3, and which was the final location of the night, we actually took a frontal view of the entire city, and I think that this was some of the most clean video that I've seen from the EVO 2, at least at night. Super clean, minimal noise, ISO 3200, 4K, 24 frames per second, and there's just very, very minimal noise in the image, which is actually pretty impressive. Photo-wise, I was able to take a couple of photos in RAW, which I think they came out pretty decent. I was able to edit a few of them and get some pretty reasonable results out of it. But if this did this well in low light, I can only imagine how the EVO 2 Pro is going to do, which makes me really excited about that camera sensor because I'm really happy about this. Now, you also may be asking yourself, well, how did the EVO perform in the city with the low light and any of the Wi-Fi noise? And to be honest with you, I didn't have any image transmission breakup. Granted, we were flying about 2,000 feet from us, but usually that's definitely enough for a drone that uses a Wi-Fi signal to have problems. And this had zero problems with reception. There was one scary moment where I went behind the SunTrust building just by a little bit and the drone disconnected. But the way Autel runs their return to home, it raised its elevation because I set it to, I think 600 was my return to home height I set. Raises elevation and returns home. Now, if this was any other drone like the Skydio would have took a very direct path. Obviously at night, we wouldn't even be flying the Skydio, but it raised right up and it came back home without incident. My heart sank a little bit, but it came back no problem. So that was a good thing. And that was the only disconnect I had all night. Now we did go location to location. So we didn't fly to the City Hall. We didn't fly to the front buildings. We actually went there specifically because I wanted to, one, maintain this mission as safe as possible so there wouldn't be any issues like that. The last thing I want to do is wreck a drone or damage a building. So we made sure we took all precautions necessary to keep everything as safe and as responsible as possible. So my conclusion, I'm pretty impressed with the EVO 2 8K capability in low light. It did better than I thought it would, especially putting it in a situation where I thought it would have failed. It came out, pretty decent. Definitely much better. I also flew this in dual stability mode, which is an option that's in the controller, which adds some break-in curves to the yaw and also allows extra stabilization to the camera, which it definitely did help in the video, at least from what I can see initially. So really impressed with it. I think, no matter which one you decide to go with, you'll have a good experience. But if you have any questions or want to know more information, be sure to check that link in the description below. I'll be sure to have my email so you can reach me or whatever, because sometimes I don't always see every single comment. But that's going to do it, guys. As always, stay original.